24th, 2015. Can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Write it over your heart. Again, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, could you call the roll?
A quorum is present.
First order of business is a proclamation declaring March 2nd, 2015 as Read Across America Day. Whereas Read Across America Day was started in May 1997, where a small reading task force at the National Education Association came up with this idea to create a day to celebrate reading. And whereas Read Across America Day is observed in the United States on March 2nd of each year, whose nationwide observance coincides with the birthday of Dr. Seuss, an American writer best known for writing children's books. And whereas Read Across America Day is filled with different activities to get students and young adults excited about reading, such as students taking part in the Read Across America channel designed to showcase student and educator videos across the country, making reading pledges, organizing book fairs, pep rallies, or reading aloud to groups of people. And whereas the faculty, staff, and students of Inglewood High School participate and stand firmly committed to promoting what Read Across America stands for in regards to reading as the catalyst for our students' future academic success, their preparation for America's jobs of the future, as well as their ability to compete in a global economy. And whereas the faculty, staff, and students of Inglewood High have provided significant leadership in the area of community involvement in the education of our youth, because research has shown that children who are motivated and spend time reading perform better in school. Now therefore be it known that the mayor and council members of the city of Inglewood commend Inglewood High School faculty, staff, and students for their dedication and commitment to this cause, and do hereby proclaim March 2nd, 2015 as Read Across America Day, presented this 24th day of February 2015 to Gail Atlee of Inglewood High School. Gail, are you here? Applaud for Gail.
Hello, Mr. Mayor.
Hi.
My name is Kaya Fraser Humphrey. I'm student body president at Inglewood High School, and I would like to invite you and the council members and respective guests to our Read Across America celebration March 2nd.
Guys, why don't we go down around and take a picture?
Okay.
Okay, Madam Clerk, the consent calendar, items 1 through 17. I did the wrong thing.
So moved.
We're going to call consent. All right.
And we have successor agency.
Oh, and a call to order the successor agency.
A quorum is present.
Consent calendar, items 1 through 17.
So moved. Second.
Madam Clerk.
Council and agency members, Dotson.
Aye.
Padilla.
Aye.
Morales.
Aye.
Franklin.
Aye.
Mayor Chairman Buds.
Aye. DR1.
Staff report recommending adoption of a resolution accepting the certification of the city clerk as to the sufficiency of the initiative petition entitled Initiative Measure Regarding the Proposed Development of the Sport and Entertainment Zone. including a stadium within the previously approved Hollywood Park mixed-use development, also identified by short title, the City of Champions Revitalization Initiative.
Is there a report, Madam Clerk?
A little small one, if I may.
Yes.
On January 2nd, 2015, the proponent, Mr. Melvin M. Roberts, Jr., submitted a notice of intent to Inglewood City Clerk's office to circulate an initiative petition entitled City of Champion Revitalization Initiative. And under the California Election Code, the election official shall immediately transmit a copy of the proposed measure to the city attorney. And for the purpose of this resolution, the election official is the Inglewood City Clerk. Pursuant to the Election Code, Section 9203, the city attorney prepares an official ballot entitled and summary for the proposed initiative petition, which was provided to the proponent on January 5th, 2015. As required by law, the proponent must submit an affidavit of publication of notice of intent and ballot entitled summary, and under the election code were allowed 180 days to gather signatures. If the petitions are filed within 180 days from the report of the ballot title and summary and are determined to have been signed by at least 15% of the registered voters in the city, I am required to certify the results to the City Council at the next regular meeting. Being that this is the next regular scheduled meeting, I present to you my certification of sufficiency.
Move adoption.
Second.
Madam Clerk?
Council members: Dotson.
Aye.
Padilla.
Aye.
Morales.
Aye.
Franklin.
Aye.
Mayor Buds.
Aye. DR2.
Staff report pertaining to the City of Champions Revitalization Initiative.
Is there a staff report, Mr. Fields?
Yes, Mr. Christopher Jackson, Senior Planner, will give the staff report. Mr. Mayor.
Welcome, Mr. Jackson.
Good evening, Mayor Butts and members of the City Council. Before I get into the report, I want to quickly go over what I will be discussing and what will be presented to this body this evening. First, we will have a discussion concerning the Section 9212 authorization. We will then review the highlights of the City of Champion Revitalization Initiative. We'll then discuss the initiative impacts, both fiscal and environmental. We will then introduce Ms. Debbie Kern of Kaiser Marston Associates to present their peer review, economic peer review and fiscal peer review, and then introduce Mr. Lewis Atwell, who is the Public Works Director, who will present David Schender of Lynn Scott Law and Greenspan to discuss the traffic-related impacts. As it relates to the authorization, Section 9212 of the California Elections Code authorizes the City Council to order a study on any initiative. A City Council approved funding for the 9212 study, if you recall, at its January 27th, 2015 meeting, with a return date of no later than March 3rd, 2015. Typical topics that are required by the Section 9212 are fiscal-related impacts, consistency with the city's general plan, specific plans, planning and zoning limitations, and other actions by certain sections of the state government code. Also, effects on the use of land, ability and location of housing, and the city's ability to meet its regional housing needs. Impacts on funding for infrastructure, for example, transportation, schools, parks, and open space, and the likely infrastructure cost or savings to current residents and businesses. Also, impact on the community's ability to attract and retain businesses and employment, and impacts on the use of vacant parcels of land, as well as, as the case may be, agricultural lands, open space, traffic, congestions, business districts, as well as developed areas, designations for revitalization, and any other matters that this legislative body requests. Relative to our 9212 report, the city contracted with Kaja Environmental Services, who who also prepared the EIR for the project in 2009. Kaiser Marston Associates was also contracted, who peer-reviewed the fiscal and economic analysis prepared by HR&A Advisors, Inc. PlaceWorks, the consulting firm that peer-reviewed the environmental for the form and the 2014 addendum for the Hollywood Park specific plan. We have also 7 other technical consultants who were utilized to prepare the report or do an evaluation of the report. Those include Hall and Foreman, who did the dry and wet utilities, Group Delta Consultants, who did the geology and seismic impacts, Aviation Systems, Inc., who looked at the Federal Aviation Administration impacts, Charles M. Salter and Associates, who did the acoustical modeling, HR&A Advisors, Inc., who I previously mentioned, who did the economic and fiscal impacts, Stetson Engineers, Inc., who did the water supply, Lynn Scott Law and Greenspan Engineers, who did the traffic and parking impacts. Kaiser, KMA, PlaceWorks, and the city staff reviewed the technical studies and the initiative text and performed a balance of the analysis. The 9212 report is in question and answer format and compares the initiative to the existing project. Would note that the report is explicitly not a California Environmental Quality Act document. The report is intended to provide information to this council and the voters of the city of Inglewood while facilitating the constitutional rights for the initiative to proceed in a timely fashion. The topics to be considered overlap CEQA in some cases, but also include non-physical impacts such as economic and fiscal impacts. Now moving on to the initiative itself. The initiative looked to modify several aspects of codes associated with the city of Inglewood. In particular, they're the areas of the general plan, the areas of the municipal code, as well as others that I'll discuss briefly. As it relates to the general plan, the initiative would amend the land use element. It would change the combined 298-acre site to a major mixed-use designation. It would authorize sports and entertainment uses in that major mixed-use land use element. And then it would add floor area ratio, height limitations in the text that also describe the site. As it relates to the housing element, it would acknowledge the 2 different alternative projects could proceed under the initiative. It would affect a reduction in the housing units for this project from 2,995 to 2,500 units, which, by the way, still exceeds the project's housing inventory in the current housing element of 1,975 units. It would modify the circulation element. It reflects the potential use of the municipal parking lots for a broader range of purposes. As it relates to the municipal code, it would rezone the combined 298-acre site to the Hollywood Park specific plan with a signage overlay designation similar to that of the form. It would identify the casino site as maintaining its underlying CR, commercial recreational zoning. In addition, it would allow banner signs in the public right-of-way. It would provide for an alternate percent for art program, which we'll discuss a little bit more detail in a minute. It would clarify that certain actions are ministerial in nature. It would cap the emissions tax applicable to the venues of 22,000 patrons or greater to $15 million per annum, as adjusted by the CPI or Consumer Price Index. It would exempt sporting events and up to 12 other events from the city's noise ordinance. It would also identify other conforming text changes. When you look at the Hollywood Park specific plan, it would amend the specific plan to add an alternative project with a stadium. The baseline project would remain in place. It would establish a process for the developer to elect the stadium alternative. As for its comparison of design, it would add that sports and entertainment category. It would expand the mixed-use areas. The office and retail entitlements would be increased. The residential uses would be required adjacent to the existing off-site residential uses. It would identify the northern parcel to be developed generally to surface parking, with a portion being used for the stadium development. What I've done is I've provided a couple of actual graphs or charts that show you the layout of the existing adopted plan and how it would be compared to the proposed plan as amended by the initiative. Particularly the two areas that I would point out is really the increase in the mixed-use area, and then obviously the increase or the addition of the sports and entertainment area within the land use map. Also, the comparison of the development limitations within the plan. In the existing plan, there is no stadium. A stadium of up to 80,000 seats would be added. There is, in the existing plan, no performance venue. A performance venue of up to 6,000 seats would be added. Within the plan, there is a maximum, as I previously stated, of 2,995 units. That would be decreased by 495 units. There is the hotel site that would remain essentially the same with the number of rooms. There is the retail area that would be increased by 270,000 square feet of retail, and then the office, which is now existing at 75,000, which would be increased by 705,000 square feet of office. When you look at the area of heights, the map would be modified to allow for the stadium area to be actually developed. In this case, the height is a little bit different because previously it was all dictated on from ground level up because of the situation of the height of the stadium as it relates to the air pathway. The designation was changed within the initiative to 290 feet above mean sea level, and then the adjacent areas would be restricted to 75 that are adjacent to the residential. We do have a graph, a chart that will show you also what that looks like. And in this particular, you're able to see a section through the area that is the stadium and entertainment area, and that the stadium would be submerged approximately 100 feet with a maximum height of 175 feet from the finished grade. Also, when looking at the housing types, the existing layout or map would be modified to add the additional 60 acres and then allow for a larger area for mixed use, and then those restricted areas for single-family homes that would be adjacent to the existing residents to the north and to the east. Also, there are some various changes of building setbacks, largely consistent with the existing project, and then the changes to the public street network. As it relates to the public parks, there were in the original existing project 4 public parks, that is Champion Park, Lake Park, Arroyo Park, and Bluff Park. Those parks would also be carried over into the new layout as amended by the initiative, with modifications to their situation on, or how they're situated within the land use areas on the land use map. I would note that you'll see that Champion Park, what was previous Champion Park by the initiative, would become Champion Plaza and be situated within the sports and entertainment zone. As it relates to the Hollywood Park specific plan, there will be key changes outside the sports and entertainment zone. The residential, the casino, the mixed-use design guidelines would predominantly be consistent with the existing specific plan while accommodating those changes to the land use plan. Signage, as we discussed previously, will be expanded. There'll be a allowance of 2 primary identity signs, similar to what we have at the Forum, updated street sections and park design consistent with the new diagrams. There'll be also some key changes within the sports and entertainment zone. There'll be tailgating code of conduct that'll be added within that zone. A stadium-specific signage rules will be added within that zone. An alternative measurement for height requirements, as I previously discussed, will also be added in that zone. As it relates to the design review process, the initiative identifies that the stadium-related areas would be able to go directly to building permit. There would be no plot plan required. It would say that the layout of the existing specific plan allows you to, requires a plot plan review process similar to our site plan review process in the city. The map identifies in numerics, number one area, which would be predominantly the sports and entertainment zone, would be able to go directly into building plan check. The areas identified with number two would actually go along the same lines as it is in the existing specific plan with most of the site. And then the number three area is the northern parcel, which would be predominantly the parking area. And as we said, specifically, a specific plan would be needed, amendment would be needed if there would be any construction above and beyond parking in that area. When we look at the changes, again, to the Hollywood Park specific plan, there will be an addition of a lot line adjustment that would be allowed. The ministerial lot line adjustments would be in accordance with the State Subdivision Map Act. Also, the overview of the development agreement. The development agreement would be extended to 25 years. It would permit additional extensions of up to additional 30 years if the stadium is built and remains operational. It would add the 60-acre parcel to the land governed by the agreement, and the development of the northern, it would stipulate within the development agreement that the development of the northern 60-acre parcel would be limited without further specific plan amendment. As it relates to reimbursements, all public improvements and event public services must be privately paid for. Public improvements and event public services can be reimbursed if in any given fiscal year the city receives more than $25 million as adjusted or escalated by the Consumer Price Index in the fiscal revenues for the project. Only the funds in excess of the $25 million threshold can be used for reimbursement. And unreimbursed public improvement costs, they will carry over or can carry over and bear interest at the city's cost of funds. As it relates within the development agreement for the event management, it does require the developer to provide a public safety management and parking operations plan annually to the city. It requires the landowner to pay for the cost of police, fire, emergency technicians, and ambulance presence. And then, when we look at the development agreement, it also institutes certain alternative mitigation measures. While I would note that the initiative is not subject to CEQA, the development agreement nevertheless will impose mitigation on the stadium alternative project. And then based on mitigation monitoring and the reporting program, which we call our MMRP, with added measures for lighting, for noise, for traffic, among others. The new mitigation is based either on the studies for this project, for traffic, or best practices from other projects such as the Forum, the Rose Bowl, the Farmer Field Project, and others. As it relates to the public benefits, it will maintain the benefits from the original agreement. It will add a 35% local hire goal for the stadium operational jobs, similar to what we had at the Forum and have at the Forum. It would add $1 million in payment over a 5-year period for after-school programs. It would permit public use of the stadium for events, again, similar to the Forum. It would require stadium signage to be made available for public service purposes, such as public service announcements, again, similar to the Forum. As it relates to our public art fees, it will provide for an alternate means of complying with the percent for art. It will mandate at least $2 million to be allocated to local artists selected in consultation with the Inglewood Arts Commission. It will also require for-sale housing required in the buffer areas adjacent to the off-site residential, and the balance of the housing could be for rent or for sale. It would also provide for a new access road for the Renaissance rear gate, which has previously been inaccessible. As we discuss the issues related to the impacts of the initiative, we look first at the city's general fund and the job creation. As I stated previously, a minimum of $25 million annually in new general fund revenues once that stadium opens. By year 16, the reimbursement to the landowner's public improvement costs is projected to be repaid, by which time the reimbursement will only be for operational costs. By year 25, the city is estimated to receive $61 million in gross general fund revenues. The project is projected to create in excess of 22,000 new construction-related full and part-time jobs, and then also projected to create in excess of 10,000 ongoing full and part-time jobs in the city of Inglewood. As it relates to impacts concerning traffic and parking, the studies identified that there is no new significant impacts to traffic. In some cases, traffic is projected to perform better than disclosed in 2009, and want to just use a caveat to explain why. When you go back and you look at that original EIR, the current traffic counts show that traffic levels have decreased since 2009. The prior EIR was very conservative, extremely conservative, assuming traffic from 2.8 million square feet of additional development, including 800,000 square feet of retail development on the 60-acre site that is being included as a part of this initiative. It also determines that sufficient parking exists both on-site and in the surrounding area to serve the stadium. As it relates to impacts on schools, it should remain the same or be reduced, as the number of units have decreased by 495 units. The landowner still is required to pay state-mandated school fees as it relates to this project. And as previously stated, the stadium will pay for a $1 million over a 5-year period after-school program for youth in Inglewood. As it relates to parks and open space, all of the parks will be open to the public, but privately built and maintained. The amount of open space remains at that same 25 acres. The stadium will be available to the city and nonprofits to host community events such as high school football games, soccer games, and graduations. As it relates to land use compatibility, the stadium use will be buffered from the adjacent residential areas on the site and situated in the interior of the site. The height is reduced from the stadium to 45 feet at the edge of the abutting residential. There are landscape buffers that are required around the site. The initiative would require that. The initiative would require the 4 self-residential units adjacent to the existing single-family residential units to the north and to the east. It also will identify that tailgating will not be permitted in residential areas or immediately adjacent to the property lines. Also, that it must comply with the regulations to minimize any nuisances that may come. Otherwise, the land use is generally consistent between the existing project and the initiative. Consistency with the housing element and policies on housing are maintained as a result of the initiative. When we get to the area of signage and lighting, signage is expanded with new mitigations measures imposed. Within the sports and entertainment zone, to kind of describe it, will be LA Live type signage allowed. The mitigation is imposed on light spill, on glare, and the refresh rate for the signs are added to reduce the impacts. As far as the balance of the site is concerned, the project identity signs are allowed, the parking entrance signs are allowed, the banners on the light posts along the project are also allowed, similar to what we have at the Forum. As it relates to noise levels set by the city ordinance will only be permitted to be exceeded by sporting events within the stadium and up to 12 other events per year. Event noise may not go beyond midnight. It is expected to exceed city noise limitation levels on adjacent properties only, so only those single families that are immediately adjacent to the site will be impacted above what the noise ordinance currently permits, and that's at the property line and, again, directly adjacent to the property. Generally, noise levels will be comparable to other LA venues with mitigation compared to what is at the Rose Bowl. As it relates to utility infrastructure, the domestic water demand remains within the amount reserved for the project in the 2010 Urban Water Management Plan. The recycled water is available to the project and required to be used for irrigation. Sufficient sewer capacity exists to serve the project on both an average and peak demand day basis. As it relates to air quality, the 2009 EIR found that the air quality impacts were significant and unavoidable with mitigation. The 2009 impacts were driven by traffic impacts, which have not increased. Initiative includes mitigations. As it relates to seismic, technical studies show that the potential for surface fault rupture at the site is considered very low. And in 2009, mitigation measures will enforce the no-build zone on the part of the site that does have a fault and require all building to conform to all applicable seismic safety standards. With that,
Well, hold on, sir. What we're going to do, council, because we're going to have to change this DVD in about 30 minutes. So what I want to do right now, if any of you have questions for Mr. Jackson, I'd like you to ask him now, and then we'll take a break and go to our next presenter. Are there any questions for Mr. Jackson?
I actually have a couple for Mr. Jackson.
Okay, Councilman Morales?
Thank you. Mr. Jackson, thank you for the report. Obviously, you did a good job of pointing out the differences between the two projects. One of my questions is regarding, you mentioned a tailgating code of conduct, which some of the residents have been asking about. How are we actually going to make sure that the residents, the visitors adhere to the alcohol used from the tailgating or the stores within the site, and how are we going to maintain that control?
well, the initiative it does not supersede the regulations that are already established through the State Department of Alcoholic Beverage and Control. So ABC still will maintain control over that. Also, but the initiative does limit the hours of when alcohol can be served and where it can be served. And then tailgating, as you mentioned, is only in designated areas within the sports and entertainment zone, and then during designated tailgating hours only. And I would say also that there's no alcohol allowed in the residential zones or even within 100 feet of those residential zones.
So the whole thing is going to be the enforcement is kind of what I wanted to get to. I have one more question, and this goes towards our 1% art requirement. The developer is going to pay the 1% for the project for the public art, which will probably equate to about $20 million. Also, the Metro, MTA is building the Metro lines over on the Crenshaw corridor. Is it going to be possible to kind of use some of that money to create the art for that entrance of the Crenshaw corridor lines to start really creating that first impression when visitors show up to the area, kind of homegrown kind of impression with the artists here that we have here, because we have plenty of them?
Yeah, and the initiative maintains the Percent for Art program with some modifications. You're talking about a $2 billion project with a $1.86 billion stadium. So as already previously stated, about almost $4 billion we're talking about. The initiative identifies that $2 million of that Percent for Art has to go to Inglewood artists, local Inglewood artists. And with that, there's also a goal of working with the youth and the nonprofit organizations within the city. The initiative also states that the funds should be used to honor Inglewood, our rich heritage, and our modern identity that we're developing as we're moving forward. So with that in mind, the use of those funds to augment art around the stations for those individuals who are going to be visiting, coming into Inglewood, would be able to be used. So short answer is yes, you will be able to use it.
And also hopefully extending it to the performing arts, which I know that that has been something that we've been trying to do with the 1%.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. I'm good with Mr. Jackson.
Councilman Padilla?
Thanks, Mayor. Just a quick question, Chris. First off, thank you for the presentation. Very, very well done and thought out. Obviously, you put some time and effort, and we appreciate that. As it relates to this presentation you've done for us, what other presentations have occurred throughout the city? Can you kind of touch on that? I know a couple of the folks that got up here and spoke,
Right.
and we had quite a few of them. I think the mayor said 50 folks ended up coming up. A couple of them had questions about community meetings or stuff like that. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, there were a number of community events where the project was discussed, the initiative was discussed, the aspects of the initiative was discussed. Many of those were attended by city staff. And I would also say that as it relates to getting the information out, as in the same fashion as we use with all of our staff reports, the links to all our attachments, there were information that was put out across the board to make sure that the public has been informed.
So there was community meetings and also stuff in the local paper, stuff like that?
Absolutely. Within the paper, on our website, we actually created a drop-down menu adjacent to where the Hollywood Park specific plan was on the planning page to make sure that some of those documents were available there. There are documents available with the city clerk in our main library. So we really went all the way out to make sure that the information was there. But I would say, to your point, there were a number of community events that were held, and city staff was in attendance with many of those.
Great, thank you, Mayor.
Right. Are there any more questions for Mr. Jackson? Okay, if not, I do have one for the city clerk. Madam City Clerk, how many signatures were submitted and verified by the county registrar recorder or the county clerk?
22,183 signatures were filed with the city on January the 26th. County evaluated 11,490 signatures and verified 8,500, a verification rate of 74%. This equates to more than 16,400 signatures in support of the initiative. In the election of last November,
Okay.
the total was 15,831 people that voted.
In November's election?
Correct.
So there are more valid signatures by extrapolation than voted in the entirety of the mayor's election?
That's
Is that right?
That's correct.
All right, thank you very much. I have a question for, is the police chief available? He's young. Harry's going to get him.
Here he comes.
With his bodyguard. Chief, I'm sorry to surprise you like this, but,
Expect you to call me that soon.
okay, if the stadium, well, no, when the stadium is built, we're going to have significantly more people coming to Inglewood. What assurances do we have that the city will be ready to accommodate the new visitors while maintaining public safety?
Well, we certainly welcome that challenge, and the city and the police department has had a tremendous experience managing special events at both the Forum and the racetrack. The initiative requires the development of a public safety management plan, which must be submitted to the city no less than once per year. This will include an interoperability plan to ensure communication between the Inglewood Police Department, LA County Fire Department, and other first responders, an accounting of the precise number of personnel that will be required to ensure safety at given events. Battling a cold, sorry.
Okay.
That fire inspectors are assigned as needed in preparation for major events. The plan will require the construction of a new police storefront substation. The new substation would be built at the expense of the landowner and at no cost to the taxpayers. Finally, the landowner would be required to regularly consult with the city, LA County Fire Department, and other public safety personnel in order to continuously improve plans based on the experience of this past events. I think that would more than adequately cover that issue.
Thank you, Chief. Well, Debbie, in the absence of Mr. Jackson, could you introduce yourself and your firm, Kaiser Marston, and tell us what you're about to present?
I'd be delighted to do that. I'm Debbie Kern. I'm with the firm of Kaiser Marston Associates. We're a real estate advisory firm, and we've been in business for about 40 years. And one of our core services that we provide is evaluating the fiscal and economic impacts of real estate projects, including sports facilities. Most recently, we were engaged to evaluate the fiscal and economic impacts of the recently completed 49ers Stadium. Yeah, we are not new to this project in that in 2009, we evaluated the fiscal impacts of the original project. Oh, so I can just turn it on here.
New watch, Chris, new watch. He did it.
You're good.
Okay, whoops. All right, let me see. Oh, geez, this thing was a little delayed.
Just a little slow.
All right. We were retained by the city to prepare a peer review analysis of the fiscal and economic analysis that was prepared by H&R Advisors on behalf of Hollywood Park Land Company. The focus of our peer review was to look at the annual tax revenues that the project would generate, as well as the number of new jobs and economic activity that the project would generate to the city of Inglewood. I just want to recap just quickly the development program that is permitted under the initiative and the analysis that was undertaken by HRNA advisors. Under the stadium alternative, under the initiative, there are two paths that the developer can go forward with. One is with the stadium alternative, the other is with the existing entitlements that are in place. And under the stadium alternative, they are permitted to build up to 2,500 new residential units, 890,000 square feet of retail, 780,000 square feet of office space, up to 300 hotel rooms. The stadium could have up to 80,000 seats, and the music venue of up to 6,000 seats. Under the existing entitlements, with the full entitlement cap, they could build up to 2,995 residential units, 620,000 square feet of retail, 75,000 square feet of office, 300 hotel rooms. The fiscal and economic impact analysis that was done on behalf of Hollywood Park assumed a slightly lower build-out for under the no stadium alternative, with the maximum residential units, but with the retail down to 500,000 square feet, the office at 41,000, and they didn't assume that a hotel would be built under those entitlements. A key metric that you've been hearing about tonight of the fiscal impact analysis is that the city will retain the first $25 million of annual tax revenue that is generated by the project. And to provide some context for what that $25 million means to the city is that the city's general fund currently has a budget of about $89 million. So $25 million of additional tax revenue exceeds the city's current general fund budget by in excess of 25%. So it is a big increase relative to the city's current general fund base. This graph shows the dotted line, the $25 million, and how it will escalate over time based upon the consumer price index. And so, as you can see, in year 10, when we assume that build-out will be achieved, the 25 million threshold grows to actually $29.9 million. And by year 25, it is anticipated that the threshold will approximate $46.5 million. So it's not a static 25 million, it goes up over time with the CPI. And while a portion of the $25 million will be used to fund general city services for the project, excluding the services that for the special events, as you can see, the service costs are in red, and the green area there is the annual surplus that is projected by the fiscal impact analysis. And as you can see, that it's a significant amount of surplus that is anticipated over time. This chart shows what the estimated impacts are as of the build-out of the project, which is estimated to occur in 10 years in the year, fiscal year 25-26. At that point in time, HRNA has estimated that the project will generate $29.3 million of tax revenue to the city. Kaiser Marston has adjusted that gross revenue to account for the amount of revenue that the property currently generates to the city from the casino and property tax revenues of the value of the site, and that's approximately $1.1 million. So the net revenue to the city, the net new that we anticipate, is about $28.2 million. You subtract from that the cost to the city of providing municipal services for the commercial components, the retail, the residential, and that's about $10.5 million a year at that point in time upon full build-out. And so the net new general fund revenues that's anticipated to be generated by this project is $17.7 million. That's per year upon build-out, and that would be going forward. And that amount will escalate over time with inflation. If we bring that $17.7 million back into in current 2015 dollars, that net surplus is about $13.2 million. So I think that in our opinion, that's the snapshot of what this project will generate to the city of Inglewood on a stabilized basis going forward. Is the $17.7 million in nominal dollars, $13.2 in current dollars. This slide compares the projection under the stadium alternative to the surplus or the impacts under the existing entitlements. And as you can see in this chart, the existing entitlement project is also projected to generate a surplus to the city, albeit a much smaller one. That surplus is estimated to be about $4.9 million a year, and with in current dollars, it's about $3.3 million. So you can see it's just a fraction of what the stadium is anticipated to generate, but it is a positive. And therefore, and that's where we come to the opinion that there really isn't a financial risk to the city on an operation standpoint, because we're projecting positives under both scenarios. This slide is to illustrate the sources of revenue that will generate that $25 million hurdle, and it also speaks to how we believe that $25 million hurdle is very well protected, and that the city can have confidence that it will in fact receive this $25 million. And that is because the stadium and music venue on its own is estimated to generate revenues to reach that hurdle point. So the revenues to the city are not reliant upon the phasing of the balance of the project, if the retail happens or doesn't happen, or if the hotel happens or doesn't happen. The stadium will generate revenues to meet that $25 million hurdle. And the stadium revenues are primarily generated because of the city's admissions tax that it passed, that applies to this project. It's a 10% admissions tax on all of the ticket sales. And that will generate approximately $18 million out of the $25 million is from the admissions tax. So we think that the revenue projections are solid. Just to wrap it up about our assessment of the reasonableness of the projections that HRNA prepared, we concur with them that the project will reach the $25 million threshold plus inflation. We concur with their expense projection. The public safety will be, for the events, will be privately funded by the developer, and those costs will be reimbursed only from revenue that's generated above $25 million. So it's a contingent obligation, but it will not affect that base $25 million. The $25 million of annual revenue is well protected because you get the first call on that, and that the stadium itself will generate the 25 million. And you also have the potential for additional revenues beyond the $25 million. And it is our opinion, however, though, that because the first call on those revenues beyond the 25 million is to reimburse the developer for the capital costs associated with public improvements, and then also to reimburse the developer, the landowner, for the costs of those public safety for the special events, that there's a lot more uncertainty with those upsides, with that pot of money, than there is with respect to that base 25 million. And even HR&A anticipates that that upside, it really amounts to approximately 10% of the total revenue that the city will receive over the 25-year study period. So the majority of the city's funds will come from the revenues under that $25 million cap, and we are very confident with that revenue source.
Debbie, before you go any further,
Yes.
the 17.7, which is reduced by 7.3 million, where does that 7.3 million go? About 17.7 a net.
Where does that, I'm sorry, the 17?
Go back one
Let me go
slide.
back.
17.7 net surplus.
Yes,
So that's a net from the 25?
yes. I'll go back to this slide because this shows the math. Here's the math. You start out at your build-out of 29.3 million of gross revenue, okay? So that's gross tax revenue to the city's general fund. We've deducted from that 29.3, 1.1 million, which is what the property currently generates in tax revenue to the city, to get at what the net new.
When net new.
Net new.
But actually, in totality, it's total 29.3, though. I get what you're saying.
Yes.
You're trying to show what the net new is.
Yes.
And so the only thing that I'm saying, we're still going to have that 1.1, even though you're backing it out because we already were getting it. But what you're
Yes.
saying, so actually, the net is going to be 29.3 less 10.5 because we're still getting the 1.1.
Yes, but, yes, many times people want to understand, though, we say, well, we already have the 1.1, so they want to know what the net additional that's generated by the project.
I know,
So-
but I want to know how much money we have, so.
Yeah,
All
but you're
right.
already spending the 1.1.
Okay, all
But
right.
that's the thing, you're already spending that 1.1, but you're right, the gross amount that the project will generate is 29.3.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, now, in this 10.5 expense, is that for additional police officers you might hire, fire service? What is in that 10.5 million?
That 10.5 is to fund the cost of providing all of the city services to the project, accepting, though, the services that are needed, the public safety services for
That
the
are
special
paid by the
events,
developer.
which will be paid by the developer. So for the residential, the city has a police standard of 2.4 officers per 1,000 residents. That's the standard. And this fiscal analysis was based upon the assumption that you would hire that level.
And this is why I'm saying this. I want to make this clear that with any development of this stature, there will be ancillary city costs that increase because of it. And with any project, it's your hope that everything will pencil out so that you'll get revenues to at least cover the increased city services. But in this case, we end up with a bigger police department totally financed by the net new revenues.
That's correct. And
All right.
and it will meet your service standards of 2.4 officers per 1,000.
Okay.
Which you currently don't have quite enough money to fund that level of service.
I just want to make that clear, that that money goes towards city services we don't have at this time.
That's
All right.
correct.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions on,
I have one.
of
Go
course?
ahead.
I know you heard people come to the mic, at least one, just don't believe the finance we can receive from this project. One of the questions direct is, what financial risks would this initiative pose to the city, period?
We do not know of any financial risks that the project presents to the city because 100% of the construction costs are being privately funded. The developer is advancing all of the funds. So the city will not have, there will not be any city dollars into the construction costs of the project. And on the operations side, we do not see any financial risk because the revenues that the city will get under that $25 million cap, as we can see by that chart, they're far in excess of the cost of municipal services. And that $25 million is generated just by the stadium, so there's not a lot of risk associated with bringing on a certain amount of office space or retail space. It's not contingent upon that. It is contingent upon the stadium being successful and generating, people have to come. That's true. You have to have people in those seats. And it's our opinion that the projections of attendance are consistent with what other stadiums are generating. And in order for this project to be financed, they will have to have all of those metrics in place with the projections of attendance. You have to have those, luxury boxes sold, et cetera. So we think that the projections on all of the operation sides are reasonable and conservative in many ways. And so we feel very comfortable with those revenue projections.
Thank you.
Yes.
Councilman Padilla.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of quick questions. First, I read the staff report. I read your information that was handed to us about your presentation. I know you kind of just touched on that $25 million revenue. You touched on the fact that I think it was by year 25, it kicks up to $46.5 million, correct?
Yes.
Can you kind of go over how that number increases? What is it that's going to attribute the increase of $21 million?
That is purely by the compounding of inflation over time.
CPI?
So that's the CPI, and that's just the threshold. So the revenues will be higher than that, but the amount of that threshold, which the city gets 100% of that before any amount is reimbursed to the developer, that by year 25, that base threshold, because of the CPI index, will be up to that 45.5.
46.5.
46.5, yeah.
Okay, great. And
But Debbie, let's make this really clear. It's my understanding that becomes the new threshold only after which it's achieved, that then reimbursements will begin to continue. The city will receive by that year $46 million plus before any reimbursements flow to the developer.
Exactly correct.
All
Yes,
right.
that is the new threshold.
That's the new-
The benchmark change in every year, it's adjusted by inflation.
Right,
So
so
that dotted line is, that threshold goes up every year, just as the mayor
so in
indicated.
year 25, it'll no longer be 25 million, 46.5 million.
Exactly.
Okay, and just as a quick follow-up, Mayor, one more question.
Sure. As long as you keep finding money.
You did the, I appreciate your analysis, and it was very thorough. I got to tell you, I was very satisfied with the work you produced. Was there any concerns, I guess, red flags that came up for you during your analysis? Was there anything that we should be thinking of?
No, we did not find any red flags. We didn't find any concerns about the HRNA analysis. The only areas that we differ is really on the way that we qualify those revenues beyond that hurdle point.
Okay.
In that we look at them as being of greater uncertainty than the revenues under that 25 million that goes up to 46.5 million threshold, so.
Great, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm good.
Councilman Morales?
We've heard your presentation. Thank you very much. Are there other areas where the city may receive more or less revenue than what has been shown in the slides?
Yes, the city could potentially receive more revenue because the project's anticipated to generate more revenue above that threshold. And, but the amount that the city will get beyond the threshold is subject to the amount of reimbursement that's required to the developer. And that's a function of what the actual development costs come in for the public improvements. The current cost estimates are about $92 million. and that will inflate over time with, there will be carrying costs to the extent that you don't have enough money of tax revenue beyond the threshold to pay that down. And then also the cost of providing public safety for the special events. We don't know what the staffing requirements are going to be. The police department's not certain at this point. They're investigating that. So whatever those costs will be is what they'll be, and the developer has to fund those. But they are eligible for reimbursement of those from those additional monies. So that's why we say that is the amount that you're going to get beyond that growing threshold. We say there's more uncertainty with that. But on the flip side of that, it's not anticipated that I mean, it's a small portion of this overall package, which is a tremendous amount of money under that threshold. But it could be higher than the HRNA has projected, too, because they haven't included some of the revenues that are key revenues to a project, such as the media contracts and things. So, I mean, there could be additional revenues, too, beyond what's projected.
Okay, a couple more things. By that graph, we're scheduled to start receiving, hit the $25 million threshold in the fourth year from now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that's because that's when it's expected that the project will be up and running. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, there is revenue received as early as it looks like the 2016-2017 year. It looks to be about 15 million or so. Would you explain where that's derived from?
That is derived from the construction, it's construction-related revenues. There are, the construction materials generates use tax revenue to the city. The city also has a construction tax. And so the construction itself is anticipated to generate over the construction period about $55 million of tax revenues to the city just from the construction. So, but that won't, the construction is going to happen over 10 years. So the first year, we don't have, we're estimating 15 million, I think, and that's because that's the portion of the construction tax revenues that are going to accrue in that first year.
And that's 2016, 2017.
I think so, yes.
That's next fiscal.
Yes.
That's a good thing.
Yes.
All right.
It's near-term revenues.
All right.
And the city, and the developer doesn't get any reimbursement out of that because we will not have reached 5 million hurdle yet. So all of that goes into the city's general fund coffers.
Okay.
Starting right off the bat.
Okay, and we're going to let you go on, and I imagine somewhere later in your presentation, but are there other anticipated ancillary economic benefits that will flow to the city from areas outside the project, or did you do that analysis?
We did, we did not look at beyond the multiplier fiscal impacts.
Okay.
And yeah, we haven't,
No, that's fine, but I just want to make it clear. So this is just what's generating the project. This is not anticipating that other development will grow in the city because this stadium is here. That's separate and apart, and that's money yet to be calculated.
In addition, exactly. So any
All right.
multiplier effects, you go out, you have dinner elsewhere, or all of the new employees and their expenditures on goods and services within Inglewood, that will support additional jobs. All of that, the multiplier effect has not been factored into these revenue projections. These are solely from on-site activity.
And these are extremely conservative then, because
Well, they are in that, yes, they are in that regard, because it doesn't include the multiplier. But it's hard to count on those, because we want you to have, a high degree of confidence in what you can actually count on. And all the other stuff is great, but you need to know for budgeting purposes what money is real.
and that's exactly what I was getting at.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Please continue.
Okay. Let me see here. So, okay, now we're turning to economic impacts. And so fiscal impacts relate to tax revenues and municipal service costs, and economic impacts relate to jobs, economic activity, salaries, payroll. Those are the kind of factors that are economic impacts. And HRNA measured the economics impacts of the project, both during the construction-related impacts as well as ongoing impacts, operational impacts after the project is built. And it is estimated that the project's construction alone will generate about 22,674 construction jobs. And those construction jobs include both short-term jobs, full-time jobs, part-time jobs, and it's not throughout the whole construction period. This project's anticipated to have a 10-year construction period. This is the cumulative number of construction jobs throughout the duration from start to finish of the construction of the project. So it's a little bit, it can be misleading. It's not, you're not going to have 22,000 jobs throughout the construction period. I think it's fair to say you'll probably have a couple thousand at any one time during that period of time. And the cost of the project, construction costs are estimated to be $3.7 billion. So that's the cost of building the stadium, building the retail, the music center, et cetera, and the homes. And so that $3.7 billion, a large portion of that will be spent on payroll, which then translates into expenditures in the local community. Under the no stadium or the existing entitlements, the construction jobs are estimated to total about 7,500 construction jobs, and the economic output of about 1.2 billion. So again, you can see that the stadium alternative generates a significantly larger economic impact than the no stadium alternative. Now, moving to the ongoing impacts of operations, and this is, I would say, more important because this is going, after when the project's built, this is recurring every year, and it is estimated that the project on-site jobs, these are not, again, this is just jobs, people employed at the stadium, at the office, on-site, at the retail, the hotels, about 10,500 new jobs will be created, ongoing jobs. They're not all full-time jobs, they're full and part-time jobs, but they're permanent jobs that will be newly created by the project. Under the no stadium scenario, the job count is estimated to be about 2,100 new jobs in Inglewood. So this is not countywide, this is Inglewood jobs, and these are on-site jobs in the project. The businesses that will be on-site, so these are the retailers, the office businesses, the stadium. When we look at the gross receipts of those businesses, it's estimated to be approximately $876 million of gross receipts. And that gross receipts is, we believe, is conservative because it does not include those other large revenue sources that the stadium will generate, such as the media contracts and the sponsorship revenue. So it's conservative. But some of those revenues will leak out of the community too. So we think that this is a balanced number, probably somewhat conservative. But that's, again, $876 million per year. A large portion of that will go towards salaries, and those people that, that are employed there will then spend money on goods and services in the community that will in turn support the creation of additional jobs as the money trickles through the economy. The no stadium will support economic output of about $109 million a year. Oh, and that's it. So, and just in summary, we didn't find any red flags. We concur with the revenue projections, the economic projections, and happy to answer any additional questions.
Is that all the questions for Kaiser Marston? Thank you, Debbie. Could I have Mr. Sparza, our Chief Financial Officer, come in for a moment? Thank you, Mr. Sparza. The question, good evening. The question I have is that There's been a lot of discussion about reimbursements by the city for the public infrastructure and the public service costs that the developer pays up front. But I want to know what our methodology is going to be to ensure that the city captures all and records all of the taxes that are generated from the project and the stadium, so that we'll know what the pot of money is before there's reimbursement. Can we be assured that that money will flow to the city first, so that we can make an accounting of it before it's dispersed to the developers?
Absolutely, and the way that it is currently set to function is that those fees and taxes would come to the city for accumulation and then recording, and to which we would then reimburse Hollywood Park and the stadium project based upon their actual expenses that they then submit to the city, which would be verified, against the project, and then they would be paid out of those funds.
So the city has the ability to verify the efficacy or validity of charges that the developer feels that they've accrued in any given period, is that correct?
Absolutely, and that would be the safeguard that we would have in place, so that we knew that, all the invoices or any reimbursement costs that had to be paid were substantiated by review by the city.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sparza. Thank you, sir. All right, Chris, I'm back to you.
I'm going to call up now our Public Works Director, Mr. Lewis Atwell.
Good evening, or is it good night? Good evening, Mayor and Council. Again, my name is Lewis Atwell, and I'm the Public Works Director. It is the Public Works Department's role to assist the Planning Department in reviewing potential impacts associated with land development projects such as this one. As such, Public Works engineering staff have carefully reviewed the submitted initiative studies and concurs with the methodologies and results presented. As Chris Jackson mentioned, these reports include impacts on existing water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure. In addition, a traffic study to determine potential impacts of the development on existing streets and roadways was also submitted. In response, the city hired Wildan Engineering to review it. Based on Wildan's review, the Public Works Department also concurs with the methodologies and results presented in the study. This also includes the mitigation measures. To provide a more detailed overview of the traffic study, traffic engineer David Schender of Lynn Scott Law and Greenspan is here to present. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, council members, my name's David Schender. I'm with the firm Lynn Scott Law and Greenspan, traffic engineering firm. Very happy to here tonight to talk about traffic for the project. By way of a brief background, my firm prepared the traffic study for the approved specific plan project at Hollywood Park. It was incorporated into the 2009 Environmental Impact Report. We had actually started that study back in 2006. In addition to preparing that study, last year, 2014, we did the updated traffic study associated with the addendum to the specific plan. So as I mentioned, we did the traffic study for the approved project. And traffic studies, as you may know, what we do is we look at the impacts to intersections, because that is typically on the street system, people driving around Inglewood. It is at intersections, particularly signalized intersections, that people will see the most delay. Also, we look at the operations at intersections on a peak hour basis. We look at the weekday morning commuter peak hour, usually around 7:30 to 8:30 or 8 to 9 o'clock. We look at the weekday PM peak hour, generally about 5 to 6 o'clock. For the Hollywood Park specific plan, we also looked at a Saturday midday peak hour generally around 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 on a Saturday, in part because of the heavy traffic on Century near all the retail. So those intersections were evaluated for those 3 peak hours. In addition, in that 2009 EIR, in addition to looking at the 238-acre project, we also incorporated, as by the requirements, the traffic from other projects in the area. Most notably, we assumed a 800,000 square foot retail development on the 60-acre parcel that is just to the north of the 238 acres and now is subject to these revised project. We also, in that prior study, considered the traffic related to other speculative projects. In that time, there was a lot of, I guess, enthusiasm, a lot of projects that were kind of put up there, and one of those included this Inglewood Promenade project of about 1.8 million square feet, and that was located across the street at the corner of Prairie and Century. And also, as part of that traffic study, we incorporated a fairly high growth rate. So besides incorporating the traffic from all these known projects, we assumed a growth rate, I guess a multiplier effect if you want to call it, just regular background traffic. So it was a very high amount of traffic that we evaluated in the prior study. We identified the mitigation measures to mitigate that traffic, and those were incorporated into the conditions of approval for the approved specific plan. So, 2014, we did the addendum for the Hollywood Park project, and as part of that addendum, we did some updated traffic counts at the key intersections for the same peak hours. And what was, I guess, not surprising, because we are seeing this in other parts of Los Angeles, we noticed that the traffic counts comparing 2006 to 2014, so just doing that straight comparison, the increase in the AM peak hour, the weekday AM peak hour, was substantially less than what we had forecast. We only saw about a 3% increase in AM peak hour traffic. And for the weekday PM and for the Saturday peak hours, we noticed actual reductions or decreases in traffic, about 13 to 10% respectively. So this chart presents an example. This is the Prairie Avenue Century Boulevard intersection, and the group of, and I hopefully, oh, it won't work. Okay. Okay. So the 3 bars to the left are the AM peak hour. The 3 bars in the middle are the weekday PM peak hour. 3 bars to the right are the Saturday peak hour. The blue represents the traffic that we counted at Prairie and Century in 2006, and that's 5,824 cars. That's basically in that 1 hour between 5 and 6 o'clock. We counted 5,824 cars basically coming into the intersection in that one period. The red bar, the 8,860, that's what we had forecast in the prior study to what would be traveling through that intersection today without even the Hollywood Park project. So that includes the traffic from all the speculative related projects as well as the ambient growth.
That was the 2009 figure.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah, right.
Yes, and that was 2009, what we actually forecast for today, for 2014. But when we did the counts last year, 2014, the green bar, it represents the actual count. So what we saw was, number one, that the growth did not happen in traffic, and number two is the actual count is less, slightly less than what we observed in 2006. And again, I should point out that this is not just unique to Inglewood. We're seeing it in traffic studies that we're doing throughout Los Angeles. Many studies we did, there was a lot of projects going on at that time in the mid-2000s. The recession happened. Things are picking up again, so we're going back and revisiting some old projects. And what we're seeing in this comparison is that traffic has decreased at many intersections. So in doing the updated traffic study for the Stadium Alternative Project, we felt that it was appropriate that we not include the traffic from these speculative projects that have been withdrawn. such as the Inglewood Promenade project, and also utilize a more appropriate growth rate, an updated growth rate that's been published for traffic engineers to use in more current studies. And also in doing the updated traffic study, we started as a baseline using all the approved, identified mitigation measures related to the approved specific plan, and identified additional improvements that would be needed to handle the traffic related to the stadium alternative, and particularly the stadium project itself. Trip generation is a key element of a traffic study. It's basically our forecast, our estimate of how many cars we would expect to enter and exit the site, again, during the peak hours that we have discussed. Traffic engineers, we typically rely on published documents for typical land uses like residential and retail and hotels. They could tell us based on how many square feet or how many residential units, how many cars we can expect coming in and out of a site during the peak hours. For stadiums, there's obviously not as many stadiums to study, but we did look at existing traffic related to current stadiums, such as the Rose Bowl. We also had some updated information related to the new stadium in Santa Clara. And we also took a look at proposals for other stadiums in Southern California, such as Farmers Field. So for the weekday AM and PM commuter peak hours, as well as the Saturday midday peak hour, what we found is that for the non-game days, so this is kind of regular day-to-day traffic, what we determined is the stadium alternative project would actually generate fewer peak hour trips than the approved specific plan, in combination with the 800,000 square feet of retail that was proposed on the 60 acres, which is now incorporated into the project. And the specific numbers that we have found here is 15% fewer AM peak hour trips, 23% fewer weekday PM peak hour trips, and 30% fewer Saturday midday peak hour trips.
Mr. Schindler, so what you're saying is, compared to the prior traffic study, with what you thought would have been there, this project has less trips. Is that what you're saying?
During the regular peak hours, day-to-day traffic, so without setting aside a football game, which we'll talk about.
I know we're going to talk about that. All right.
But just regular day-to-day traffic, there will be less traffic generated by what is now a 300-acre site.
Monday through Saturday.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. For the Sunday football games, which we're now discussing, the 75,000 fans that we estimated, the traffic coming to the stadium would be less than the approved project, and that's in part because, as you have probably read in the documents, there will be about 9,000 parking spaces set aside on site, a minimum 9,000 at all times for stadium events. But part of the transportation plan includes utilizing existing parking resources that are close by, so that we don't have to build acres and acres of parking or mega parking structures. And in addition, the project will have, as you know, a shuttle program to shuttle people to and from the transit station, currently the Green Line, and then in the future will also be to the future Crenshaw Line. So the local area traffic, if you take in the project itself as plus the people utilizing the off-site parking lots, that would be higher than what was forecast for the prior project. But that, again, is limited to the few days a year that we have 75,000 people coming to an event. So this is a chart that kind of goes through all the math of how we analyze trip generation for the various land uses. Again, going down the column to the left, you can see the components, the residential, the retail, entertainment, and so forth. And then going across are the various different peak hours. The first site access total row that you see about 3/4 of the way down the chart, again, that is the number of cars that if we had traffic counters, if we had those tubes that you see on the road, at all the project entrances on Century, on Prairie, and on Pink K, if our forecasts were correct, During the weekday AM peak hour, for example, you would count 2,272 cars, and that's a total of ins and outs that we would see. And then if you go down to the very bottom there, what you see are the numbers that were part of the approved Hollywood Park that was in the EIR, the 2009 EIR for that project. And you can see in the AM peak hour, the number was 2,676. So, and those numbers, the differences get larger as you go across the page. And that was in part because, and the reason we highlighted the yellow bar there about the 800,000 square foot retail, that was a very high generator of traffic that was included in the prior traffic analysis. And this is taking that data that you saw in the last chart and putting it into more of a, pretty colors, I guess. It's showing the blue is what was forecast in the 2009 EIR. The red is what we project for the stadium alternative. And the last two sets of bars are the Sunday pre-event and Sunday post-event. And again, what you see is if you measure traffic around the site, even for an event with 75,000 people, we would see less cars coming in and out of the site during those peak hours. There will be other traffic that's happening at the off-site parking lots, and that has been accounted for in the traffic study. But actually, cars going to and from the close to 300-acre site, it would be less than what was assumed in the prior traffic studies. So for the conclusions, as we've said, the stadium alternative project, we project will generate fewer site-generated trips during the peak hours, and that's, again, in combination of the approved project with the 800,000 square feet to the north. And during the pre- and post-event traffic on Sundays, it would generate more traffic, but it does not result in more impacts because, and we'll go through some of the points here, but it's a combination of lower traffic counts, a more realistic forecast of future traffic, as well as there is a significant package of transportation improvements that have been proposed in addition to those that were part of the original project.
So, Mr. Schindler, the 2009 study that you did, that was part of a full CEQA EIR, is that right?
Yes.
And so that was a process that took some 2.5 to 3 years, I would imagine.
Well, we did the counts in 2006, and the EIR wasn't certified to 2009.
So 3 years. And so that was a full-blown EIR. In your updated analysis, this is less than the impacts that were approved then for construction.
That's correct.
That's a very important point to make. Thank you.
So to kind of wrap up the points that I want to make, this is, I guess, kind of the elevator speech that I'll make going from the ninth floor back down to the first floor. Here are the 4 points, again, to just kind of reiterate. Number one, we've demonstrated that actual traffic volumes at the study intersections throughout Inglewood and into Los Angeles have decreased since 2006. Number two, what we found is that the forecast that was done in the old EIR took into account a lot of speculative and never-built projects that resulted in the overinflation of forecast traffic in the prior EIR. Number three, and I think this also helps to explain, why is the 300-acre project generates fewer trips than what was previously approved and considered. That is, you have to think about that the 60 acres was originally going to be an 800,000 square foot shopping center, shopping mall, and now you're more or less replacing it with a stadium which during the weekday will have very benign activity. There'll be some employees going there, but otherwise during the day we'll have very few trips. And again, except for the rare weeknight football game, as well as the game day traffic during Sundays, the traffic around the site will be less, but that traffic happens in the late Sunday mornings and early Sunday evenings when overall ambient traffic levels are lower than during the weekday commuter peak hours. And finally, as I said, even though there is less traffic, we did, in working with the applicant, develop a very substantial transportation plan to handle stadium traffic, because I know people want to stay and shop, but it's my job to move traffic, or recommend measures to move traffic. So that included funding for additional traffic synchronization on the boulevards leading to and from Hollywood Park. So that would be all the traffic signals along corridors such as Crenshaw and Manchester and Century. All those intersections will be synchronized leading from the stadium to the freeways. In addition, we recommended street widening around the property on Century and Prairie, so that there'll be separate turn lanes so that cars will be able to pull out of the through lanes of traffic, slow down and make their turn into the project, and thereby reduce the delay to people who are not coming into the project. And finally, we've identified improvements at off-site intersections, such as the Prairie, Manchester, Prairie, and Century, and Crenshaw Century, to add additional lanes to help better move traffic at those locations. So that's my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. I know some of the members have questions here. Councilman Franklin?
Yes, thank you very much. I want to address, and if I can have Mr. Atwell also come up, we can talk about the transportation mitigating measures. As I'm reading the report, there's been concerns, as you, in your last slide, if you leave it up there, does address about addressing these issues of traffic congestion or mitigations. Currently, we've had the Forum and their venue. We've had over the years the Hollywood Park activities occur at the same time. Now we're talking about bringing in this massive stadium or some sort of sports venue. What avenues are we taking to deal with that intersection of Century and Prairie that we haven't already done before?
Well, so the project program includes street widening of Century to add turn lanes, and that's already part of the approved specific plan. So that will happen, with this project or not. But there is the requirement today to widen Century to add a turn lane so cars can make a right turn going westbound Century to go north on Prairie. So that'll be a new dedicated right turn lane.
Where is that land coming from for that right?
Well, that land the project applicant will be required to dedicate property to the city. So in order to make room so that that right turn lane can be provided.
And also, I think it's critical to acknowledge that your study went just beyond the boundary lines of the city. As you've indicated, that we're talking about on and off ramps all the way, include the 405 freeway, the 110, and the 105, which means it now has an impact of the traffic flow and the signalization of those intersections as well, coming in and out of the city of Inglewood.
That's correct. And the study looked at all those freeway interchanges, as you mentioned, along those the three freeways, and the synchronization program that would be implemented for Inglewood can tie into existing synchronization systems that are in, say, like the city of Los Angeles. So the two systems will talk to each other, and so that will ensure smoother flow out of Inglewood into Los Angeles and onto the freeways.
And then with the green gas emissions, we have the issue of trying to reduce the amount of vehicles on the roadway, and so that's where it's good that we have public transit. And so with the light rail coming into the city of Inglewood, the relocation of the bus terminal, that will become a win-win for us to move that as well, along with our mayor being on the Metro board. All right, thank you very much.
All right, any more questions for Mr. Schindler?
Yeah, I have one. A couple of.
Councilman Padilla.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Schindler, first off, having had law enforcement experience and I was involved in our traffic section at the department where I worked at, I appreciate the clarification you've given in the presentation about traffic flow studies and where we were in 2006, what it ended up being in 2009 in your environmental impact report, your estimates in 2014 and the reality numbers. And there were several folks that came up here earlier and concerned about traffic flow issues, but quite frankly, it seems like that's mitigated. And also, whatever traffic flow there is, we have other traffic calming measures that you've talked about, synchronized traffic lights, so traffic will flow smoother, turning lanes at key intersections so that it won't prevent, or will help prevent gridlock,
Yes.
widening of the streets. All these things are going to be beneficial to everyone coming, not only to events at the stadium or at the Hollywood Park project, but also the Forum and any other areas here in Inglewood. So I thank you for clarifying that. To Mr. Atwell, as it relates to the infrastructure, are we prepared to handle the increase in all this as the Director of Public Works? What are your thoughts on that?
As most of the people here know, we have a robust history of providing traffic control and moving traffic in and out of the city, especially with the former Hollywood Park, 40,000 visitors during the heyday, and also the Forum as well. Back in those days, there wasn't alternative measures of transportation. It was primarily by vehicle, and it was 1 to 2 people per vehicle. Nowadays, we have the Metro Rail, which the mayor is fondly involved with, and also we have more taxis. We now have Uber. We now have off-site parking. We have a lot more alternatives. With that said, the study that Mr. Schindler put together included 49 intersections. We're going to synchronize 29 of them, and we're going to widen the streets along Prairie and Century Boulevard. In fact, our Century Boulevard design plans have already incorporated, or will incorporate in the construction, the dedicated left-hand turn lanes, and there's the right-hand turn lanes along Century as well. So I'm confident that this project will be able to handle, with the mitigation measures, we'll be able to handle the additional traffic.
Good to hear. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Any other questions on traffic? Okay, Mr. Jackson.
Mr. Mayor, that concludes staff presentation. Staff is available for any additional questions that you might ask.
Mr. Morales has a question.
I just have one regarding signage. I know that there was a long description about what I know that some of the neighbors have been asking, okay, how is that going to impact us in terms of how bright they are and everything else? We know the Forum put up the one on Prairie in Manchester, which is fine, but in terms of and whether the brightness. Comment on that.
Yeah, the initiative and
It's like she's ready to go.
I can, if you want to answer, you can, or I can.
Absolutely, I'll defer to one who looks better than I do. So.
Good evening. I'm Stacy Henderson from Kaja Environmental Services, and we helped prepare the 9212 report. In terms of limits on lighting, the initiative has a limit of 3-foot candles at the adjacent residential uses, and I know that's not really a number that is very relatable. And so to talk about it in something that's more practical and easier to understand, the Forum has a limit of 2-foot candles at its property line, and closer to the building and under the columns at the Forum, the lighting is more like 5 to 10-foot candles. So the amount of lighting we're talking about here from signage and other lighting is much less than what you would see at the exterior of the Forum. In addition, the 3-foot candle limit is the same limit that's been imposed from the Staples Center. And there are additional stadium alternative mitigation measures that have been provided here to ask for things like shielding and make sure that the impacts from lighting and glare don't affect the adjacent residences.
Councilman Franklin.
Since we have Kaja there, I do have a couple of questions, particularly with the sound, the noise. So I want to deal with in reading the report, there's a number of comments raised about the decibel levels, particularly if it's a football game, it's in the 46 to 50 range. When you're talking about concerts, it's at the 65 to 69 decibel range. What does that mean to us as residents as far as how do we equate that to sound, whether it be a lawnmower or what? Can someone elaborate?
Yeah, my name is Rob Carnahan. I'm also with Kaja. We're kind of a two-headed beast here tonight. As you noted, the events at the stadium, and this is detailed in the 9212 report, will generate additional noise. Specifically, the decibel rating is a little hard to kind of get your ears around, but essentially it comes down to 60 decibels is a normal conversation at about 3 feet between people. And what we did in the 2009 EIR for Hollywood Park is presented some background information on noise levels and real-world examples. A jet flying overhead at about 1,000 feet above you is 100 to 110 decibels. Bird calls are about 40 to 50 decibels. So the sound levels for a football game that we've, in the acoustical analysis that was done for the 9212 report, would be about equivalent to what you would hear from bird calls in a neighborhood. And again, this is at the location of the residences near the stadium, or nearest to the stadium property line. Concerts, which would actually be louder than a football game, would still be at the level of a normal conversation that you would be having with somebody. These would be at the closest residences to the stadium. Once you get past to the next row, let's say, of homes, beyond that, the decibel levels would be dropping about 5 to 10 decibels from what they would be at the property line.
And that was my concern, because there's a gated community immediate adjacent to the property called the Renaissance. And there was concerns raised with the investment of their properties and the impact of the noise that may occur with these events occurring, that there's been some mitigation done to help address those areas of concern. So I appreciate that.
Councilman Dodson.
My question's on parking. That's a bad word around here in Inglewood. So does the parking plan for the stadium rely on any parking from the forum?
No, it does not. The forum, it's certainly possible that a mutually beneficial parking arrangement agreement could be worked out between the owners, landowners at the stadium and the forum. But the parking identified in the analysis that was done and included in the 9212 report does not depend on that type of any sort of arrangement. There is, we've identified over 50,000 parking spaces that are available, potentially available to serve the stadium, and 33,000 of those spaces are within a mile of the projected stadium site. So for the stadium itself, an event at the stadium would need, let's see, just over 21,000 spaces. So as you can see, within a mile of the stadium, there's more than enough parking that's been identified to serve the stadium, and that's without the forum. And certainly there is a possibility that the forum spaces could also be used, but it's not dependent on that.
All right, Councilman Franklin.
I just have one more question, and I'll reach out to Chris or someone to speak on your behalf. There's been a lot of discussions in the presentations we've had today about jobs, jobs, jobs. We as the city have been promoting jobs, but local hiring. So who can speak on, with these 30,000 jobs they keep talking about during construction or after construction, that we have a level of confidence that these local jobs actually will, in fact, be made available for an opportunity for Inglewood residents to be able to have those jobs?
Yeah, we'll have Mr. Gerard McCallan of Wilson-Meany come up to answer that particular question.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. It's an excellent question, and I think I actually would like to answer it. There's the items that are written in the initiative, the 35% once we have a stadium built, the 30% MBDBE, local hire requirement, the 15% apprentices, and those are all numbers. But your question is actually, how do we actually achieve that? We actually have in the audience our workforce outreach coordinator, Michelle from Turner Construction. And right now on the existing project, we're over at 43% local hires, and that's actually verifiable through our local reporting that is available to you as a citizen. But we actually have a very robust workforce outreach program itself to actually achieve those goals. And I want to actually back up a little bit. Before, when we did just minor renovations on the casino, we had a 63% efficiency rate. Yeah, that's actually higher than most things that occur in the city of Los Angeles, so much so that we're being awarded by the Greater Los Angeles African American Chamber of Commerce an award based on being able to meet our local requirements and also our requirements for MBDB requirement as well. I think at the end of the day, I think we've been here for quite some time. We have a very personal responsibility to be able to meet those numbers. I think we've gone over and above. We've got job fairs that are required by the agreement, but we do over and above those. We're at every job fair, including not our own. We're at the job fairs that include the Kaiser Hospital that's being built in the Martin Square area, the airport expansion project, the Metro project. We are actually at every one of those recruiting, asking for locals. We've got zip code requirements that we look at, and I would make ourselves available to have those records available to you as well.
And also you had the District 4 Town Hall meeting.
And the District 4 Town Hall meeting.
And just for the record, that you use the acronym of DBE, so Disadvantaged Business Enterprise.
Correct.
Just so the audience knows.
Yes, and
Right.
I want to say we are well above every percentage now before this project even gets started. And I would just say that with the increased number of jobs, that makes our opportunities that much more available to the locals.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Gerard, before you sit down. Realistically, how many days per year are the exemption to the noise ordinance going to be utilized?
Well, there's a maximum of 12. It's 12 that's kind of written into the ordinance. And then after that point, if there's any more, we would have to come before you for any types of approvals.
But right now, we have 12 on the.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and only up to midnight. They're actually at the time limit to when that noise could occur.
Thank you.
Just briefly, I mean, since obviously you've been involved in the changes into the project and everything else, how is that actually going to be impacted? Today, currently, you have a group out there that's currently working on the approved plan, and if this changes, what kind of pace will we see kind of slow down? Are you prepared to move forward? What kind of impact is that going to have on a changing project?
We are currently moving at a pretty good clip. I mean, as you know, right now, we've got a lot of construction going on relating to demolition and the infrastructure. Once we get this kind of initiative move forward, we will then actually add on top of that an accelerated schedule to be able to start construction sometime in December. So, but right now, we're strictly on the infrastructure. So right now, there's a very slim window for us to be able to get into gear for the next project.
Thank you, Mr. McCollum. And Mayor, just before we move on, I just wanted to say that, all the years I've actually been on the council, and a lot has been said today, but when a city has the kind of opportunity that we have today, it's an amazing time, and it's because of partners that kind of stuck around. You've been around for 7, 8 years. We hit the economic crisis, and we're still here. And it turns out we've gotten better choices to make. So I just wanted to say that I think thank you all for the great report and plus all the documents you gave us throughout the week. I really appreciate it.
Okay, I'm going to make a motion. Before I do, I have a few things to say, because although the critics were few, they were pretty inflammatory, so I think everyone deserves to understand the totality of what we're doing here. First of all, this is an initiative. It's not modifiable by the council. We have to put it to the ballot for a vote on June 2nd, as we called for, or we have to adopt it as is without modification. But before we get to that, there's some realities that we have to deal with. This is a proposal to build a stadium. This is no guarantee that tomorrow football team, the Rams or anyone else will be here. But this is a bold move by the developers and the city and everyone that signed that petition and supported it to say that we're bold enough to realize that if we build the most beautiful, newest, modern, most expensive stadium in the history of stadium construction, that it will be occupied. And I commend everyone involved. You heard tonight that we're $1 billion in debt. At 5% simple interest, the debt service on $1 billion is $50 million a year. Our general fund is $89 million. So it wouldn't be possible that we have $1 billion in debt because we couldn't even make the interest payments on it, all right? And to add further clarification to that, when I took office, we were some $18 million structurally upside down, meaning on an average, we spent $50,000 more a day than we were taking in revenue. We were headed towards bankruptcy. We had an unfunded liability in our medical program that we have for retired employees that was a $335 million unfunded liability. This council took bold and decisive steps to stabilize the budget, right-size the workforce. We went from having our last $11 million in the bank, of which we owed $14 million to employees for accrued sick and vacation leave, which meant functionally we were bankrupt. But it would have manifested itself later in that year. We had a water fund where we hadn't raised water rates since 2003, and water prices had about tripled. And the council took the bold move, the unpopular move, to raise water rates to compensate for the increase in water prices so that we could have a capital fund so we could start repairing our 60-year-old water infrastructure. Those type of steps, combined with courting Madison Square Garden to come to the Forum, they spent over $100 million to renovate the Forum. In 2014, it was the #1 concert venue in the greater Los Angeles area. They had twice as many concerts as the Staples Center. Because of that and Hollywood Park Tomorrow breaking ground, we were named the best neighborhood in Los Angeles for 2014 by Curbed LA, which is Internet magazine on real estate. Hundreds of local residents have jobs today that didn't have them on January 14th before the Forum opened. The council's always delivered. But regardless, and I'm not going to say all the media, but some of the media still want to cling and use old stereotypes of our city. When we talked about Madison Square Garden opening the Forum, people scoffed at us. They said it would never happen. Then when it happened, they said no one would ever go there. And then when it sold out every night and was the #1 venue, they just stopped talking about it. So then we came to this endeavor where on January 5th, we announced, the initiative folks announced that a petition was going to be circulated to enable the developers to add a sports entertainment zone to the already $2 billion Hollywood Park development. And let me tell you, the same things happened again. First, here's what the media said. In general, we're being used by an owner to get a better deal in St. Louis. Then when we got all the signatures, then they said, I didn't understand how the financing worked and we were really being taken advantage of. Then when Fred Rogan, bless his heart, every day on his radio station said, no, they're the ones that don't understand. This is a great deal for the citizens. They piped down with that. Then we were trying to get around the EIR, even though we're in complete compliance with CEQA law, which provides the alternative if the people want this to come forward. And then when that became clear, then suddenly campaign donations became an issue. And I want to address this really up front. Now, they went back to 2006 to compile the donations given by Hollywood Park Land Company to council candidates. And you know why they went to 2006? Because that's the only way they could get to 100,000 to make a sexy story. Because there was no football stadium on the table. In fact, Gerard, Chris, they donated against me when I ran against Danny Tabor. 4 times. So, I mean, this cute story really starts getting weaker and weaker when you add the truth to it. Now let's talk about when they did donate to me. In 2013, we were at a crossroads here. We had 2 people to the left of me that we were going nowhere with sitting in those seats, and I'm going to be honest with you.
To the right.
Oh, to the right. Thank you. Thank you. To the right. And at that time, I said, we have to make a change or we're going nowhere. And everyone told me that you can't unseat incumbents and it's a loser and you'll lose. But we would not be sitting here today if I had not raised money. Some of it was from them, but I raised over $160,000 for those 2 races. Over $160,000, of which they may have given 40 or 50. And I didn't get any of it, George. But anyway, but I loaned it to campaigns of people that I thought were honest people, that were intelligent people, and that's what you see populating this council. Now, the only time they've donated to me for my race was when I ran for re-election, and I think they donated $15,000, if I'm right or wrong. But what I'm saying is, so when you look at the story was meant to craft this impression, $100,000 and Mayor James Butts. Now, why would you do that? You know why? Because they wanted to intimidate us from exercising option A here and not vote on it. That's the only thing I can think of. You see, because in my estimation, this is a big thing. And there are people that don't think this big thing should happen in Inglewood, no matter how deserving we are of it. The deal that's been offered to the city, this is financial arrangement, is the best financial arrangement in the history of stadium deals in this country. No one has had a stadium built in their city that was 100% financed by the developer. No one has had public infrastructure cost preloaded by the developer. And definitely no one has had public safety and maintenance costs that would be on the city's debt burden fronted by the developer until they made $25 million in a given year. So I read an opinion page thing in a local paper, and here was their suggestion, that the council not take this up, the people should do it. But then if the people voted it in, since they really wouldn't be able to read something that big, then the council should ask for an EIR anyway. Now let me tell you what that equates to. Drop dead Inglewood. 3 more years for another EIR based on traffic counts that are lower than what they were in the original EIR is insane. I believe that the first entity to build a quality stadium will end up doing a lot better than the person that does the second one. And we have a responsibility, and it's not to run around scared of people criticizing us. It's not to sit and wait and put our finger to the wind. We have common sense. There's a businessman on the corner, some very educated people on this council, and we have a responsibility to what amounts to about 16,000 people that, doing extrapolation, would be verified signatures. More people than voted in the last election, which I had 13,000 some votes and won by 83%. So what more do you need to know? We need to do the will of the people, and we need to do it tonight. Now understand this. The things that have happened and gone on are going to continue. But I want to thank Fred Rogan again for really being an honest, forthright journalist. I move that we adopt an ordinance adopting the City of Champions Revitalization Initiative without alteration at this meeting.
Second.
Madam City Clerk, well, wait a minute. I always wanted to say this. Al Michaels, the broadcaster for Monday Night Football, when the ball was on the 1-yard line with 30 seconds to go, he always said, and it all comes down to this. Madam Clerk.
Council members Dodson.
Aye.
Padilla.
Aye.
Morales.
Aye.
Franklin.
Aye.
Mayor Buds.
Aye, now we can celebrate. Madam City Clerk?
Yes, may I please say something?
You can say a lot.
Okay.
This is
Okay. First, I want to give thanks to my office because through this process, it was pretty intense. When you see 42 boxes come with stacks and stacks of signatures, 22,000, that was a lot. It was overwhelming, and we got it done in a couple of hours. And I also want to thank Yakima Decatur, because I called her and I asked her could she come down and help, and she said yes, and she came without any reservations. So, and I want to say thank you to Miss Aisha Phillips. Congratulations.
Councilman Franklin.
Aye.
Councilman Dodson.
Look, I just got to say one thing. We get all this credit to council, but we have a staff that worked tirelessly to give us the information that we need to get these jobs done. So my kudos go to the staff. They have really put us on top. And with the leadership of the mayor, and let's back him up, we got it done. And I think this is one for the history books.
Councilman Padilla.
Just thank you to everyone for being here and all your support, and staff, thank you for these.
Councilman Morales.
Oh, thank you all.
Okay, so let's go on with life now, you guys. We're adjourned. All right.